Welcome to Soul Sparks, where stories of healing and awakening light the path back to who we truly are. I'm Yusuf, and tonight we are exploring one of the most thought provoking frontiers in the world of healing, the intersection between mental illness and spiritual awakening. Our guest, Sean Blackwell, is the author of Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder, and a certified holotropic breathwork facilitator. Since 2007, Sean has been helping people reframe and heal from what the world calls disorder by uncovering the spiritual dimension behind it. Through his bipolar awakening healing retreats, he's guided clients into releasing deep trauma, often leading to long term healing and even medication free lives. Sean's work invite us to ask a radical question. What if your breakdown was actually a breakthrough? So tonight, we'll explore how crisis can become initiation and how the very thing that breaks you open might be the thing that sets you free. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure. Sean, your book challenges the traditional view of bipolar disorder. When did you first start to see your own or others' crisis as spiritual awakenings rather than
Yeah,
purely medical events?
right. Well, in 1996, I had an experience myself that was very spiritual. We don't have time to get into all the details of it, but at one point I was on a self-help seminar and we were doing an intensive meditation on our fear, and during that meditation, I felt a punch in my chest, and then I became extremely emotional and recalled trauma that had happened to me just a few months earlier in a scuba diving accident where I lost my weight belt um, 30 meters below the surface, you know. So I almost died in that situation. But when I came through the meditation, all my senses had sharpened. I could see detail in curtains I couldn't see before. I had a sense of all knowingness, like I knew things I never knew before, and a sense of connectedness and oneness with everything around me. So it was very spiritual experience, very similar to the Buddhist idea of samadhi, if anyone's familiar with that term. But it went further, and eventually, after a few days, I began to think that I had died, and that I died during the scuba diving accident, and that I was in a kind of a purgatory, a place between heaven and hell. And so I felt like I needed to go and meet God. And to do that, I needed to take off my clothes. And this all happened in a hotel ballroom. I took my clothes off in a hotel ballroom and refused to put them on. And the police came and basically arrested me and put me in a stretcher and took me to the psychiatric hospital. And there they thought I had maybe bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. But for me, I thought it was a very good thing still, even though I was kind of crazy. Uh, and I was able to recover very shortly afterwards, very shortly. So that was a spiritual experience for me. And it really had a big impact on my life. And I learned a year later about a pioneering psychiatrist, a guy named Dr. Stanislav Grof, who had written a book saying that there was actually an experience called a spiritual emergency that can look like an acute psychosis of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, but that was actually beneficial, and that if you could work through it, it could be good for you. And so reading his book, I was like, well, that's what happened to me. I had this spiritual emergency. I didn't have a bipolar disorder or a schizophrenia. I had the other thing. And it was very beneficial for me. When I went back to work, my salary tripled over the next 3 years. I became very successful at what I was doing, and it ended years of depression, you know? So that was really the beginning for me.
So, what could be the signs of it?
The signs of having a break with reality, well, for the person who's in it, you think you're dreaming. That's, or the world takes on kind of a dream-like aspect. We'll put it that way. And so, like I said, you can have sharpened senses, um, feeling of all knowingness, a feeling of oneness and connection with the world, but also spiritual delusions can come up, like thinking that you're the Messiah, like that
Mm.
you're Jesus or Krishna or Buddha reborn, that you're here to save the world, that you're here in a battle of good versus evil. So these are all these are sorry, these are obviously very spiritual delusions
Mm.
that can get you put into the psychiatric hospital, but they actually do have a spiritual foundation. That's the difference.
And you talk about holotropic breathwork. How does this process help people who want to release that emotional suffering or trauma?
Okay. Well, skipping ahead quite a bit in the story, but when I started to realize with working with some family members, people in my wife's family, not my own, who had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, that their experience wasn't so different from my own, that they had gone through similar experiences, but were being medicated for life. And it took a long time, a lot of study for me to see the connections between what they went through and what I went through. And I came to see that, wow, what was a breakthrough for me, which was so beneficial, was actually something that got them medicated for life. But I came to see that there was this gray area in between my experience and their experience, and that a big part of it was that people with a bipolar diagnosis had been traumatized. There was a lot of trauma there, and that the trauma was actually not biological, but was in your basically your chakra system, or you could call it a subtle body. In India, you've heard of Kundalini. There could be a Kundalini blockage there. And so when you do breath work, this type of breath work that I do is something that releases trauma from that um, bioenergetic Kundalini system or chakra system, you might say. Okay. So, what's the technique though? You need to have someone who's certified with you as a facilitator because they need to have the correct experience. And then the breathing itself is simply aggressive breathing. It's not a particular technique. It's just aggressive breathing in a safe space with powerful music that goes along with the process. Uh, and then the person, once what the breathing does is similar to psychedelic therapy. The breathing opens up your ego. Okay. So you become more open. And when that happens, unconscious material comes to the surface. These um, trauma related blockages in your chakra system, we'll call it. They start to surface, they come to the surface. And when it does, the feelings of the trauma that were repressed, those feelings come out. And then in that moment, you have to express it physically and through vocalization to really work out the emotions that have been trapped in this chakra system. Okay. And so that's what the breath work does.
So basically, what I could understand is through breath work, you can free something that is in you.
That's it. Yeah. You're freeing trauma. You're freeing trauma.
Mhm. Okay. And you have helped people transition from heavy medication to a more holistic path. How do you balance that hope with the very real need for safety and supervision?
That's an excellent question. And for many years, I kind of battled psychiatry. For the first 6 years of the work that I started to do with people, where I was actually supporting people through acute psychosis. Instead of medicating them, I would just stay with them and support the process. And I had some good success there, but when you don't have a supportive culture, it becomes very difficult because healing does take time, you know. Eventually, I realized that the best way to work with people in my society or in our society is to respect the role of psychiatric medication, that psychiatric medication does bring people back from these states and grounds them, and that while they're grounded and while they're medicated, that you can use breath work as a way to help them heal. And so I created what I call the Bipolar Awakenings Healing Retreat. And that put me in a position where I would work with people in an undivided way for 10 straight days. And in those 10 days, we would do what I call bipolar breath work. It's a modification of holotropic breath work. Do this bipolar breath work in a way to help them relieve as much trauma as we can across a 10-day period. All right.
Mm. And
Yeah. So, yeah.
but
And so one thing about the psychiatry. So until that point, I'm not messing with the psychiatric medications. And then only afterwards, if the clients feel great improvement, I suggest they go back to their psychiatrist to talk about a gradual reduction. That was a good
wow,
point.
that's a very responsible and compassionate approach, I would say, because hope and caution working side by side, walking hand in hand, that's the kind of balance this conversation really needs.
I think it is very much needed.
Mm.
I'm not so sure about the anti-psychiatry culture you have in India. I get the feeling there's not much anti-psychiatry culture there, but in Europe and in the United States there is. And the tendency tends to be that if people are against or if they're questioning psychiatry, that they're very much against the use of psychiatric medications in a very strong way, like the Church of Scientology is completely against the use of psychiatric meds. But you can be looking for an alternative way forward and respect the role of psychiatric medications while working on your healing. And my work is kind of unique in that way.
It is very unique. Let's just say someone is in the middle of a breakdown. How do you help them find meaning without romanticizing the suffering?
Well, when someone's in the middle of a acute psychosis, a non-ordinary state, their rational functioning is not working. They don't have a rational brain happening. They are working in a much more primal way. So I'm not really trying to help them find that much meaning. Maybe I can give them a little bit of art therapy, but for the most part, if it's an initial psychosis, which can be supported, I would just be with them. And there's a theme, whether you're doing breath work with people or whether you're supporting someone in a psychosis. The idea is to be with them, but don't do anything to them. So, yes, you give them protection, but you don't manipulate them. You don't try and control them. You're just there with them. You're supportive. You feed them, but you keep the conversation to a minimum because their mind could just go in any direction. So you tend to stay quite quiet, you know. Um, Later, you can look at the symbolic meaning of what's going on once they're grounded and figure out, well, these are the things you were talking about. What do you think that means? And understanding that on a symbolic level, what someone who appears to be crazy is talking about might have a point, you know. And and one good example I think is when people have been sexually abused, they can often point to someone close to them and accuse them of being the abuser when in fact they weren't the abuser. Well, sometimes they are the abuser, but there are many situations where they are not the abuser. The abuser is highly likely was somebody else,
Okay.
but the person's just pointing in the wrong direction, the person in crisis. So you don't want to deny the fact that they feel that they've been abused because they probably have been. They might not just get the details right. And so this is a way we need to respect the subjective truth of the person and recognize that it's not you shouldn't be just dismissing everything a person says in psychosis is crazy. Often there is deeper themes going on, you know.
True. What I could understand is with an example of a storm. Someone is in the breakthrough, is in the breakdown, he is in the storm. We should be there for them, let the storm calm down. And when it calms down, we need to understand why the storm came.
Yeah, I
Mm.
think that's a nice analogy. But it only works with the first breaks of psychosis, and that's what's tricky. So there was a place called Soteria House, a clinic in the 1970s and 80s, where if somebody went into psychosis, they would be taken directly there. They would never be given medication, and they would just be received this way. But if people have been in the psychiatric system for a number of years and had multiple episodes, then working with them in this way doesn't work. We don't know why, but they just get stuck. So it's as if the storm never ends, you might say. All right. In the beginning, yeah, you can get through the storm, but then later on, you're just stuck in the same storm. So that's why I created this private healing retreat for people. And that's what I talk about in my book, Bipolar Awakenings. I talk about the specific development of my work into creating a private healing retreat and then other healing modalities in the future.
Now, thank you for explaining it a bit further using that storm metaphor. You have worked with people all over the world who have redefined what healing means. How do you envision the future of mental health if we start embracing both science and spirit?
Yeah. Well, they don't need to interfere with each other. And there's been a battle between religion and science for a long time. But within every religion, there is a kernel of truth, which is that God exists. There is a spirit there, and that spirit is in everybody, whether you believe it or not. So if you're an atheist, I have a surprise for you. You have a spiritual dimension. And if if you're a religious person and then one day you realize that your God never existed, well, I've got a surprise for you. The God is still there. It's just not the way you thought it was, you know?
Yeah.
So the religions speak to us in a language that we can understand, but the divine intelligence itself is much greater, you know. Um, so one big thing about the work I do is that spiritual orientation I bring passes a scientific filter. So there's nothing I'm doing that you would say, well, from a scientific perspective, this is false. This is not true. We're not performing miracles. I'm not turning water into wine. I'm just working with a spiritual intelligence that will show itself even to a an atheist if they're
Mm.
open to it. If they're open.
Sean, is there any way our listeners can connect with you? Maybe your Instagram, website, or LinkedIn?
The best way to connect with me is through my website, which is bipolarawakenings.com. And that's where you can find both of my books as free PDFs. You could download either of my books as free PDFs, and you can contact me for a free 30-minute consultation. I'm doing, at this point, my work with doing the retreats. I'm also doing work with people at a distance, so I can help people at a distance now. I've got a training program for people, and the work is just getting easier and faster and cheaper for people to do. So it's a good way to go.
Yeah, our listeners will connect with you. Sean, is there any last message that you want to leave us with?
Healing takes courage,
Mm.
but you don't need to abandon psychiatry to do it. I mean, you can stay grounded, you can keep working on your healing, and as long as you've got determination, you can make some big progress. So I'll just leave you with one story from a client of mine. When I first started working with this guy, he all he could talk about was that he was going to create a global currency, which was going to solve all kinds of economic problems. He was going to create the Tegra, and all the world's countries would adopt this one currency, and things would be better. And this was his idea, and he wouldn't stop talking about it. And it was annoying because obviously this was an idea that, while nice in principle, was never going to take place. Now this guy, he's got a regular job. He's got a wife. He's got a kid. He still takes his medication. He still deals with hallucinations sometimes, but he comes across as a real, genuine human being, and he doesn't talk about the Tegra anymore. So healing can come in different ways, and it can take some time, but it can happen.
Sean, thank you so much for sharing such courageous insight and grounded wisdom. Your work
Thank you.
remind, your work reminds us that healing isn't linear. It's cyclical, soulful, and full of mystery. To everyone listening, if you are in the dark season, remember what feels like an ending might actually be an awakening in disguise. Get the help you need, but also hold the space for possibility that your pain is trying to grow into someone freer. This is Soul Sparks, and I am Yusuf. Until next time, keep your heart open, your breath steady, and your soul curious, because every spark of awareness can light the way home.